All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here with Sebastian Siegel, an award-winning writer, director, actor, and producer whose work is strongly focused on intimacy, consciousness, and the meaning of life. We're here to talk about his new film, Grace and Grit, based upon the marriage of Ken and Treya Killam Wilbur. And this film is really about their journey through marriage, illness, treatment, and ultimately death. So thank you, Sebastian, for joining us today. How are you doing?
Wonderful, Ben. Thanks so much for having me here.
Where are you checking in from today? Where are you guys?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Nice, nice. Are you based full time out of LA?
I am.
Very cool. Well, let's just start here in the basics. What inspired you to tell this story?
Mm-hmm. There are so many amazing movies about love, and rom-coms and conventional films. And I think when I read this book, I had read a number of Ken Wilber's books, which are all books on consciousness. This is one of his very few books. It's a true story that chronicles his wife's journals. That it seemed to me to be a story about love in the way that it really happens for all of us. In other words, most love stories are act one, act two, act three in very conventional format. And this film, this book seemed to depict love in a way that is dynamic, that's exciting, that's romantic, that's passionate, and then extremely challenging, that wounds us, that is tough, that makes us, rise up when we don't want to, but something inside tells us to stay in it and to rise up. And then ultimately, it's a story about love beyond life. It's a story about eternal love. And I was thinking about, when I read the book, how there are very few movies that really capture that. Yeah, there are some movies that certainly carry that theme, whether it's Love Story with Ally McGraw and Ryan O'Neal, she passes at the end. Titanic, yeah, passes at the end. The Notebook passes at the end. Ghost even, that there is something there within these films that articulates something within us that is, I think, indicative of when cavemen used to draw on the walls in the caves. My friend, my lover, my partner is gone. Their body is still, and yet I still feel them with me. I see them in the eyes of an animal. I feel them in the stars. And I think that that's really what the ultimate love story is. Yeah, that when we fall in love with someone, we fall in love with that person. And yet we also fall in love with love itself, with something beyond that. And I think that we're always seeking to touch that, which is how we're able to stay in love. Or if we're wounded and broken by love, why we are able to love again. And so this story, I think this book really depicted that. When I read it, man, I cried. And yet I was somehow uplifted and inspired. And then I read the reviews from people around the world in a number of different languages, Japanese, German, Italian, Spanish, etc. And everyone seemed to feel the same way, that people were writing things like, this book, this story made me believe in love again. This story made me not afraid to die. This story made me want to become more, that kind of thing. And then I really started to think about, wow, was this love story so special? And that was what prompted me to want to make it into a movie, because I feel that movies are immersive, that in under 2 hours we can sit somewhere and relate to other people's experiences in a way that may even open up vistas within ourselves to allow ourselves to get excited or transform in some way.
Yeah, I know tactically right off the bat, from a storytelling perspective, like you were mentioning those movies and the 3-act structure, and with the power of this story, this kind of love beyond the physical body, a love that transcends just one lifetime, I was marveling at how quickly you needed to relay that to the audience without giving the audience time to, really, because traditionally you got these first and second acts that really builds that relationship. But to truly tell this story, you had to get to that real quick. And I really loved that first kitchen scene, which was love at first touch. I'm wondering, I guess my question is, you had to know that you were going to inform the audience of this love right out the the gate. Was that a challenge for you, or did you face that challenge in the writing of this script or more in the production portion of it?
Great question. I'd like to answer it in 3 lines. One would be staying true to the book and staying true to the original story. The book's 400 pages. They fall in love in the first 20 pages or something, and it happens right away. So that's one thing, just having the integrity to honor the original book and story, which I felt that even if I was going in blind and just following that story had a certain secret sauce in it, that if I stayed true to that as a writer and adapted that accurately, that it would capture that essence. The second is that I think that's how love happens to all of us, that we meet someone and then all of a sudden something happens and we don't know that moment, but it just happens and we fall, and all of a sudden we're in love, and it's just like whew, and that's why we call it falling in love. That we don't ultimately make a conscious choice, that the choice is somehow made through us, that we just fall. Yeah, and so that was another thing. And then I think also as a storyteller, as a craftsman, as a cabinet maker, if you will, I know I don't like to run top credits in any films. I feel like as a filmmaker, as an audience person, if I love the movie, I'll find out who's in it and who made it at the end. So I like to jump right in. There's no top credits in this movie. I want to know right off the bat, and in the first 2 minutes of this movie, who, what, when, where, why. And I feel that's important because I started writing and producing and directing trailers and commercials. The entire commercial or trailer might be 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I needed to get people to care for these characters within a minute. I needed to let them know all those things. And so I felt that doing that was important, for this film. And then in terms of the production of it, having a good blueprint in the writing itself, I think, allows then the director to work with that. And so because I knew I was going to be directing, in the writing of it, I was, seeing those scenes and those shots specifically. And then I think peripherally and lastly, I do a lot of prep in every area of production, from casting to, prepping with actors, to set design, to costumes, to lighting, to lens testing, to locations, etc. And then even in the writing process, I go about it the same way. I do an enormous amount of research. And when I was prepping for this film, Ben, when I was writing, when I was adapting the screenplay, in 1 month I watched 2 love stories a night, right? So for 30 nights, I watched 60 love stories. So in that was very helpful for me to find out what felt parallel and true to this story and what worked in terms of timing. I learned enormous amounts, from other filmmakers by doing that. I will say though that because it's a love story, that most of my friends who were men would say, well, what are you doing tonight? And I'd say, well, at 6 o'clock, we're going to watch Titanic. And then we're going to have dinner at 9. And then at 10 o'clock, we're going to watch Ghost. I would know. They said, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, tomorrow at 6 o'clock, we're going to watch Rust and Bone. And then at 9 o'clock, we're going to watch The Notebook. And say, no, you know what I mean? But all my friends who were women became so much closer with me. So I think success modeling, and referencing other artworks that are, comparable in some way, will lend itself subconsciously to the extrapolation of a screenplay, during the writing process. I find that valuable for myself and whenever I'm writing a screenplay.
Very cool. So one of the things that I'm new to your work, but I'm already becoming a big fan, and I think the reason I'm becoming a big fan is because you have, as a human being, have obviously been on this journey of discovery beyond kind of like traditional Western culture, right? You have this Ken Wilber, I'm sure the Tao Te Ching, those type of Eastern studies are things that you have obviously absorbed as a human being. But now what I love is that you're actually taking those elements and fusing them into your art. Can you tell me a little bit about that journey? Did you start out as a teenager kind of being like, hey, there's something more here? Or did that happen at a period in your life?
Wow.
Later?
Thanks so much for offering that up, for seeing that too, for pointing that out. And that's probably pertinent. It's probably relevant to why I made this film on a subconscious level, now that you say it. My father's a professor of comparative religions. I went to a Christian and Catholic school. My father's Jewish. But he was a professor of comparative religions with a specialty in India. So as a child, as a kid, he was always in India. And then I would visit him. I'm from England. And then I would visit and lived in Texas. And I would visit him in Hawaii every summer. And his specialty was India. So, you know, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and then, you know, going into China, Confucianism, etc. So I was sitting in on his class all summer long, every summer. And then later during the year, since I was 2 years old. And I think that probably the Hindu iconography had a huge impact on me, seeing these gods all as avatars of one another. In other words, all of us being lit up from the same source, I think subconsciously affected me, seeing God in the eyes of the other, if you will, or spirit, or what have you. And you know, my father was is a brilliant author and writer, and has written an enormous amount about India and love and romance in India, and about those epics. And so certainly as a kid, I think I was privy to those stories, whether it was in Texas from the Bible, or, you know, with my father, the Tao Te Ching and the Bhagavad Gita. And these books became, you know, important books for me as a young man. When I was with my father, I was 9 years old. We went to a moonrise in Waimanalo, Hawaii. I met Joseph Campbell. I didn't know who he was at the time, but then later, you know, became friends with his wife, and, you know, loved his writings, and other contemporaries of that time and earlier, you know, like Alan Watts, etc. But certainly the subtle impact I think that it had on my own character and my development of my own personality, not just the books, you know, like the stories from the Mahabharata or the Tao Te Ching or the Bhagavad Gita is a wonderful book for me as a young man. But I think it probably informed my style of storytelling. And when I say that specifically, I mean stories within stories that extrapolate a simple plot, perhaps, that point to something that's much greater. Yeah. And those are the stories that I loved about the Bible, stories that I love in the Indian mythology, that they can be very simple, almost anecdotal. And like this movie, the plot is very simple, but really the story is huge. Yeah, the story is great. Yeah, the story is about life beyond. And I think that poetry, art, and music, we can listen to a song, let's say, again and again and again, because it touches that in us. At least that's what attracts me to music. For example, U2's the song One, right? That song is so beautiful. And every time I hear it, I have some sort of emotional response. And I think, why is that? That the song touches something about that juxtaposes both the pain and the beauty of love, and that those things are inseparable. And that if we can accept the pain, that we start to celebrate that pain as part of the dynamic that drives the beauty of love. And I think that for me, I'm most interested in that paradox. And so I try to infuse that in everything that I do as a storyteller, whether it's in books or in film.
Yeah, that's awesome. We need more storytellers like you out there. In Grace and Grit in particular, tell me a little bit about your DP. Have you been working with this guy for a long time?
Thank you. Yes, he is wonderful. And like, what a match made in heaven. I mean, we've done 4 projects together. Obviously, you know, Shan, most people call him Sean. You know, we met on a project which I was an actor on, and I loved his work and just his style. And then we did one of my documentaries. We shot some together, working with the brilliant psychologist James Hollis. And then we did a couple trailers together. You know, so you know, Sean and I we're simpatico and have a sort of telepathic shorthand, which is very important for director and DP. This is why, you know, DPs and directors work together so often, again and again and again and again and again, right? You know, Sean and I have shot on a yacht, on a Zodiac, in a helicopter, underwater, you know, in speeding cars. And if I think about all of those things, you know, I took those projects on early on as a commercial director to position myself in years to come to direct and produce big franchise films. Yet also I wanted to push myself, I think just intuitively, to do things that I thought were hard to do. For example, shooting on a yacht is really hard to do. There are books written about why not to shoot on a boat, you know, the sound and the lighting and the insurance. I mean, there's just a number of reasons why you don't want to shoot on a boat. And so I wanted to do it because I knew it would push me as a director. Same thing in a helicopter. You know, I can tell you stories about being in the ocean, like 8 miles out at sea, and looking up and seeing Shan in a helicopter like 70 feet above me, looking down, hanging out of a, you know, and like trying to direct the scene with sign language that we had discussed at 4 a.m. that morning. That connection is invaluable. And especially going into a film with the emotional intensity of this one, because, you know, in production, obviously, you know, when a film is on every film has a budget limit, and the schedule, you know, especially on something like this, is sort of truncated. Part of being a producer is just overcoming, not just overcoming challenges that will inevitably come up, but making those challenges into assets. And so if a director and a DP have worked together a number of times, there's a quick way to say, oh, look at this, you know, there's a fire, there's a storm, or we're missing an actor, or there's something happening here. We immediately know already in very few words, you know, how to see and perceive things together as a team. Sean is also a cinephile and a great student of film. And the use of light in this film, you have this man and woman on screen, and yet the love is between them, and yet the story is really about the moon and the stars, right? So the moon and the stars need to be in the dialogue, and they need to be in the light and in the music. So in terms of the DP, lighting is a character in the film, right? So everywhere we go, you know, I trust him enormously, and he also knows exactly what I want and exactly my style, because we spent so much time in prep. So that by the time we get to a place, he'll say, hey, Sebastian, check this out. What do you think? You know, and I'll say, oh, man, I love this. Yeah. Also, I think on set, you know, as a director, it's the director's job to have a specialty in every department, whether it's casting or acting or wardrobe or lighting or etc. But the director's job is also to know that no matter what their specialty is in each department, that the director is not going to know as much as the specialist in each department. And so my job as director is to really discuss and explore costuming, production design, locations, but to then also trust that the person, in this case, let's say DP, really knows lighting better than I do, right? That I have a selection of, you know, and I'm always looking to learn from those individuals, whether it's actors or grip or everything, every aspect, right? Scripty, everything. So, you know, when it comes to prep, for instance, with my DP, we do, you know, many days, 4 or 5 days of lens prep. So that looks like, you know, we're in a room with, like, you know, lenses around all the walls, etc. And we're evaluating what camera to use and why. I wanted this to be very real. I wanted to feel in this sort of Terrence Malick-esque way. I wanted to be very intimate. I wanted to be up very in close. So we're using a lot of wide angle lenses. We ended up using lenses that are comparable to the lenses that Malick used on The Tree of Life. And Sean and I watched a number of movies and discussed them all in depth, you know, before going into this, you know, really talking about styles and visuals. And then we did about 100 to up to 200 miles a day in location scouting with our team of, you know, location scouting. And then Sean and I ride together, and that gives us a chance, just hours and hours and hours to discuss stuff. And then when we go into a house, you know, I'll feel something out and say, this is it, you know, this is for sure, this is it, I feel this. And then he'll say the same thing. I'll say, hey, what do you think about this? You know, this really speaks to me in the light. And I'll say, ah, yes. And then we'll hash stuff out. You know, and we really design each shot. And then leading up, just going into, you know, days before, I like to do everything just from a sort of craftsman way, off of a hard copy script. So I write extensive notes. So I'm writing notes about lenses. I'm writing notes about, you know, frames per second. I'm writing extensive notes going in, so that I know that, you know, I want the audience to be in this world. You know, we're shooting, you know, standard, let's say on a 20. And then if I want something to feel dreamy, you know, we're shooting 200 frames per second at many spots in this film, you know, to give it this sort of dynamic feel, even shooting on a 14. So then leading right up into, I'll put a button on it here, with leading right up into production, right before we go, we did, I think, 3 days at my house from 8 a.m. until 10 p.m., 11 p.m., just me, my DP, Sean, and my AD, Gus. And the three of us just went through the script extensively, and literally I acted out every scene, every character, so that, and we wrote notes about lenses, about what to get in of, what to get in and out of quickly, you know, what was really pivotal, and how to shoot every shot. That way, by the time we show up on set, no matter what happens, both my AD and my DP know exactly what I want, and then the three of us are simpatico. That way, when we get on set, no matter what happens, we can adjust. You know, because we're going to have to make those adjustments. And we did. And a lot of those adjustments ended up making the film better than I could have even imagined it would have been.
Well, thank you for just giving our audience a micro masterclass on pre-production, because that's exactly what you just did. And I have to tell you, it definitely, the whole reason I asked you about the DP is because that completely came through. The light that was on, that felt like the light of the universe many times in a lot of these scenes, some of these transitional scenes, where even one of the scenes where he was walking down the hallway of the hospital and he finally had his breakdown moment, just the way the music transitioned, all that, I was really, you know, I'm trying to look at it from the enjoyment of the audience member, but I just couldn't help but get caught in the master class of how you were shooting it. So really kudos to your team on that piece. Really well.
Thank you, man. And Ben, and thanks for that reference to that shot. That's actually one of my favorite shots in the movie. You know, that's a long oneer. No cuts, no coverage. And we only did 4 takes, I think. And, you know, that scene starts with like 7 or 8 people in it total. You know, it's got 8, 9 people, I think, total in the whole scene. There's not one cutaway. There's not one coverage shot. And then it ends with one person. You know, it starts bright and light, you know, in this room. And Trey is going to go in for surgery. And the mom comes in. The 2 doctors are there. And Ken's there. And, you know, mom and dad come in, and an assistant comes in, and then, you know, it's full of all this energy, and it's bright, you know, it's upbeat. And then he leaves the room, and he starts to walk down the hall. And as soon as he walks down the hall, we see it on his face that he's going through this journey as he goes down the hall, which he's revealing to the audience, but his lover doesn't know it, that he is really having a challenging time. And then he gets down the hall, and he has to then project his personality and the facade of being together and upbeat, which he's having to do for his wife. But when he sees the nurse and he passes her, then he passes her, and then we see it again wearing on his face. And then he turns the corner and goes down a darker hallway. And I had written that all into the script to be this journey that we could see visually and feel visually as we felt it musically and see it in Stuart Townsend's brilliant acting. Then he sees a couple pass by him, and they're having a challenge. And then he goes down through a doorway, and then he goes down a darker hall, and then he sees this empty dark room, and he goes in there and he sits alone, and there's just a little bit of light in the room we see on his face. And we end in this sort of Sergio Leone shot. Yeah, that's really up close, where we're really with him, and we're seeing all the pain and challenge and overwhelm that he's going through that he can't share with his wife. Only the audience is privy to it. And I think that every man knows this feeling, right? Every lover knows this feeling, when we have to be strong with our lover, and we cannot reveal to them the challenge that we're going through, even if we're like devastated and on the edge, that we have to be strong for them. And that by not disclosing to them, you know, our own struggle, we do it in order to help them stand. And so in some way it makes us stand taller. And so I felt it was important to shoot that as a oneer. Furthermore, Frances Fisher had to fly back to shoot Watchmen after that. And she had told me, you know, I need to get out by like 3 o'clock or something. We had her, she had to get on a plane to Atlanta. And I said, Frances, I'm going to have you out before 2. We got her out by before 12:30. So, but I had written that originally as a oneer, and that was an exciting shot for me. So thank you. I suppose I wanted to, I think about shots. There's in a lot of movies, you know, with great directors, there's a lot of shots that show off the ability of a filmmaker. And, you know, I think of shots instead of really telling a story, that I'm going to shoot a long oneer never to show off visually, but to take the audience somewhere intimately. And I felt that with this particular scene, this is the first time you see the vulnerability of our male lead, who places his hands so close to the deck. He doesn't show anything to the world. And that's how Ken Wilber was at the time. And at that moment, it's the first time the world, through this book, and then, you know, obviously depicted in this film and in the scene, it's the first time the whole world gets to see, wow, Ken Wilber has this vulnerability. This man has this vulnerability. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that was one of at least 3 scenes where I really picked up on the craftsmanship of the story that you were telling. And frankly, I think that's what I love about what I've seen of your work, especially in this film, is that, you know, it can be challenged to tell a story like this when all the action is literally talking heads. You know, it's doctors, it's family members, it's friends, all at dinner tables. And to be able to make that interesting and take the audience on kind of that subconscious journey, it goes back to what you said during your micro masterclass. That preparation and all that work is what manifests into a deeper soul of a film, for lack of better terms. So I think the audience needs to know that this is the type of story that you're a storyteller that you are. So congratulations.
You know, I appreciate that. And I think also I love what you said about the, you know, the internal journey, because, you know, even when I was, you know, learning as a commercial director, writer, producer, that it doesn't matter how big the car chase is, especially now, because we can, for 30 seconds on YouTube, we can see the most amazing car chase ever. We can see, you know, people jumping out of helicopters, doing stuff that is just visually amazing, and amazing what human beings can do. It doesn't matter how big the explosion is. It doesn't matter, you know, how deep under the water we are. Not anymore. You know, those shots used to be expensive as little as 10 or 20 years ago, 8 years ago or something. You know, the iPhone came out, what, 12 years ago or something like this, right? 13 years ago. So more and more, it matters how do we get emotionally attached to the characters. It doesn't matter if you're selling a Mercedes, a Rolex, an American Express, or a love story. Right, that we've got to care for these characters. And it's in our care for these characters and our relatability with them that allows us to laugh, and allows us to cry, and allows us to be moved, whether it's a 2-minute commercial or a 2-hour movie. So I think that is ultimately the internal journey. You know, where does the character start internally, and where do they end internally, even if it's a 2-minute commercial. And if we could do that then in a 2-hour movie, that's the real adventure. I think also, you know, beyond storytelling, the way that we think of our lives, if we think, you know, if we think of a day that we really had a fun night or a fun day, right? You might say, well, I went with a friend to a dinner. And what happened at the dinner? We all just sat there and ate food. And that's the plot. But who cares? What happened was that somebody said something, and it caused us to respond in a certain way, to offer up information about ourselves that made us think a little differently or feel a little differently. And then we saw, oh, that was so fun at that dinner or at that party or that whatever the thing was, or during that walk or during that hike or whatever the thing was. That's how we're moved in life. And I think that's why we intuitively seek art again and again and again. That's why we always go to watch another movie, or like to go to a museum, or like to listen to music, or like to, you know, look at paintings or read poetry. That we're looking to be awakened in some way. We're looking to have something inside of us sparked, you know, that is already there and is hungry for that needs to be fed, just like any other facet of our being. Our soul needs to be fed. And so the internal journey is critical, I think, to the success of being able to draw in audiences, whether it is a 2-hour movie or a 2-minute skit or commercial.
Well, I think that the audience will be able to truly see that in your film, Grace and Grit. I wanted to thank you for your time today. Thank you for being a creator who goes beyond mainstream content. Like I said, you're imbuing the soul of humanity into your films. I could tell by this one, and I'm really excited to see more of your work.
Thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate it.
So is there anything else that you'd like to talk about outside of Grace and Grit? Anything that you'd like to drive new fans to?
I'm in development on a few other projects, all IP, different IP books, true stories. One is a true story about a brilliant swimmer. It's like Rocky in the water. It takes place. It's a contemporary story. Another film is called Life Coach. It's like an Anthony Robbins type story about a life coach who his life seems perfect, but then we find out it's actually falling apart. And he starts on the top. He gets derailed and then it comes back again at the end. It's sort of like American Beauty. Another story is called 180. It's also based on a book that's a true story about a guy who's an alcoholic and falls into drug use and hard drug use and then becomes homeless and then becomes a millionaire, goes sober and then becomes a millionaire by the time he's 30. It's also a true story. It's kind of like Johnny Depp's Blow meets Wolf of Wall Street. So I'm taking a departure from this genre to do a number of other things. I'm exploring also studio film that would be a thriller in the way of like Seven. But I think that I love storytelling, and I'm so grateful to be able to collaborate with such other extraordinary artists and people who love storytelling like yourself. So thank you for having me here today. I hope people will watch this movie, and I hope that it sparks something inside, as the book did, I think, for so many people around the world, to want to love more deeply and to want to love courageously, both that electrical current in ourselves and in one another.